Hi, I'm Lydia Rackham, and oh my goodness, I didn't move my my Charlie Chaplin. Is that gonna bother you? I'm gonna move him. This feels like somebody is watching me over my shoulder. Sorry, Charlie. I'll move you over here. Anyway, um, okay. So I'm Lydia Rackham, and we are studying prayers in the Bible, specific prayers in the Bible, and how they're answered and what we can learn from them. So we started at the beginning, and we're going all the way through. So where we are, we just were at Rebecca, and now we are on to the next generation. So Rebecca had two sons. She had Jacob and Esau. Actually, Esau first, then Jacob. And Jacob, as you know, becomes the chosen person. His name is changed to Israel, and he becomes the father of the Israelite nation. But Jacob himself has a very his growing up life, he's not honest person. To begin with, he tricks his brother Esau out of his birthright and out of the blessing that his father could have given him, that Isaac could have given him. And so that was dishonest. And then, of course, he had to run away because Esau was going to kill him for doing this. And he went to his a relative, and straight away at a well again. There's lots of things that happen at wells. People meet their wives at wells. He meets Rachel and falls instantly and madly in love with her. And she's a distant relative of his. And so Jacob agrees to work for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. So he does, and it says he doesn't care how long it is because he's so in love with her, and he's just so madly in love that it seemed like a day, whatever. But then it's kind of his dishonest dealings with his brother and his dad kind of come back to bite him in an interesting way, because maybe it runs in the family. Because instead of giving him Rachel on the wedding night, they gave him Leah, who is her older sister. Now people are kind of like, how did that happen? But they had a veil over you. You were veiled the whole time, and they didn't spend a lot of time together after the wedding. Like a lot of times the women were over here and the men were over here for the whole wedding after, like, the party. And so, and if they were trying to pull one on him, I'm sure they weren't like, make sure you talk a lot. And then you obviously drink a lot. You drink a lot. And then, so Jacob went to bed drunk with who he thought was his wife, Rachel. And he didn't realize until morning that it was Leah. And that horrified him. And then he was like, give me my wife. And so they said, no, finish out your bridal time with Leah first, and then we'll give you Rachel, but you still have to work 7 more years for her. So he took Rachel, the one he had wanted in the first place, and then worked 7 more years. And then eventually Jacob gets away from Laban, his father-in-law, and heads back, to the promised land. That whole thing is a giant mess. First of all, we don't know what Leah thought of this whole thing, but as we know, back then, women were property, and they were given by the men in their family to do whatever. They said that Leah's eyes were weak, so she couldn't see probably well enough to do anything skillful with her hands. That must have been the problem. Maybe she just can't see very well, and no one else wanted to marry her. So they pawned her off on Jacob. So already that's a very cruel thing to do. Like, no one wants to marry you, so we're going to trick this guy into marrying you when he really wants your sister. And everybody knows that he does because he spent 7 years working for the sister. So if Leah wasn't jealous of Rachel before, she really is now. And then, can you imagine waking up with your husband on your wedding night and he screams and runs screaming out of the room in a fury because he does not want you. He does not want you. And then he brings in the one that he does want. But you, as the wife, are stuck with him and her now, knowing that he didn't want you, but you're stuck forever. Now, what I find is real interesting, and I always find this interesting in Bible stories, is that they will say that the man loved one of the wives more than he loved the others, or he loved her and not her. And yet he's sleeping with the one he doesn't love and making babies all over the place. Like, fast forward into Samuel, where Hannah and Peninnah, their husband, it says he loved Hannah and he gave her all this stuff. But Peninnah had all these children, like I said, all her sons and daughters. And it's like, ew. Like, ew. Like, you love one, but then you are sleeping constantly with the other one and making children over and over and over. Not just, okay, we've got a son. Okay, we've got a son. We've got one to inherit. I don't need to touch you anymore. Like, it's like over and over and over and over. I don't love you, but I don't know. There's something strange about that. I don't know. Maybe it would make sense to a man's mind back then, or something, but it would not and never does make sense to a woman. A woman hates that. A woman never, ever wants to share her husband. And honestly, a man would not want to share his wife. He would not want to be like, oh yeah, she sleeps with me sometimes and then goes off to this other man. I mean, that would infuriate any man. So I don't know why they think that they could, that this right here is a recipe for a happy life. I mean, I know this is a lot of setup to the prayer, but it kind of has to happen because God never explicitly says, stop it. But what like with all these wives, he does say when he's laying down, like early on, when he's like, when you eventually ask for a king so you can be like all these other nations, before they had even thought about that yet, he said he should not have many wives because it will lead his heart astray. Well, and immediately, what does David and Solomon do? They go ballistic with having tons of wives. And I think, and he obviously set up what he wanted. In the garden, it was a man and a woman, the end, perfect, good. Like man, woman, perfection. So he was already displaying what that is. What his plan is a man and a woman, not a man and 20 women, not a man and 2 women, none of that. It's a man and a woman. And his leader, like Moses, one wife. Everybody was looking to Moses. He only had one wife. So this, I have a feeling that God wants us to look at what happened. He wanted everybody to look at what happened here with Jacob, with his 2 wives who were sisters, who it was just family feud for the rest of Rachel's life. It was an absolute war because Leah was not loved by her husband. She was not loved, and probably not loved by her sister anymore either, because they were in competition now. But here's what when it's in Genesis 29:32. Leah has a child, and she says, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." That's really sad to me. Surely my husband will love me now because I've given him a son. Wrong. He doesn't mind sleeping with her all the time, but his heart isn't hers. Oh, so mean. Like, that's so mean. And then she has another son and another one and another one until she has 4 sons. And I have a special note here. It says, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb. God was not a fan of all this. He was not a fan of how she was treated. It's a little bit like what happened to, Hagar was not supposed to be involved in the promise, and she was shoved like a piece of property, like a piece of meat, shoved at a man who didn't want her, but it was a function, like here. So Leah was the same way. She was shoved by her father, who should love her. But I've never seen a more unloving thing, than to trick someone into marrying your daughter who did not want to marry her. What? You're just destining your daughter for a life of misery. What did he think was going to happen? Like that Jacob would be like, "Oh, goody." What a cruel thing. And then Jacob, instead of just leaving her alone, comes to her all the time and yet doesn't love her. So God resolved it in the only way that really he could there, because he wasn't dealing with Jacob in that way. Jacob is a bullhead. We're going to find that out. He's a stubborn mule of a guy. He gave Leah children who would love her. He gave her sons who would love her. And they do. But she's always seeking after the love of her husband, and she does not receive it. And so then she stopped having children for a while. And then the competition between Rachel and Leah becomes heated again. And then Leah prays to God to give her another son. And it says, God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a 5th son. That's Genesis 30:17. So it says specifically, God listened to Leah. So as things are going on here, we have to assume that a kind of an odd thing is sort of happening that I've heard of sometimes, and it's a interesting philosophy that before you can be loved by a husband, God must be your husband. And I wonder if Leah is sort of developing that relationship with God, that as far as the love that she needs in her life, the genuine, protective, self-sacrificial love that needs to come from a husband, if she's not getting it from Jacob, she's getting it from the Lord. The Lord has become her husband, and he gave her another son. Meanwhile, Rachel is chewing the walls of the tent in fury because the love of her husband is not enough. She's got to be in competition with her sister. So they each are envious of what the other has. They are not happy with what they themselves have. Leah has children, but she wants Jacob. Rachel has Jacob, but she wants children. And these are two women who really should have been friends. They should have been best friends from cradle to grave. But because of a man, and because they were pitted against each other by their own father, they became enemies, terrible enemies. But then finally, Rachel realizes her need for God. Also, she can't do it alone, and she must turn to God and ask him for help, because I'm sure she feels creepy about Leah having all these kids with the husband that says he loves her most of all, yet he's always over there in Leah's tent. So Rachel prays, and said God finally answers Rachel's prayer for a child. God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and said, God has taken away my disgrace. And whose disgrace? Like, in front of whom? I suppose it's the other family members that they're living with, like in Iran. But a lot of it was like they had left. So it's disgrace in the eyes of her sister. One son. And that's Joseph. Of course, that's Joseph. And we'll get into later. Actually, no, because Joseph never asks anything of God. I don't think he does. Nope. He receives a promise, but he doesn't record that he asked anything. So God gave her one son and took away the disgrace. And then she wants another son. She wants another one because her sister is already in competition with her. And I also think that Jacob acquired a concubine or two, and he started having more kids. It's like, oh gosh. But, so Rachel, because she would not give it up, she dies in childbirth with Benjamin. God answered her prayer and gave her another son, but she died. So that's an interesting conundrum, an interesting thing to think about. So far, we've not yet run into a no, have we? Every single prayer that's been prayed to God has been answered with a yes. Yes. And the whole life between Rachel and Leah and what happened with them, I believe, is supposed to stand as a testament to how not to do marriage. Firstly, don't marry two women. And actually, it says later in the law that you're not to marry two women who are sisters. So, I mean, that just puts an extra emphasis on how upset this whole situation made God. I mean, yes, it made the 12 tribes of Israel, but God is never happy with strife, with covetousness, with hatefulness and competition inside of families. He doesn't like it when husbands are not loving to their wives, because it even says in the New Testament, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, giving himself up for her. And Jacob did not love Leah. He loved Rachel. And that was reflective in the life that, like, afterwards, after she died, Jacob hadn't learned his lesson still and was playing favorites with her children. So Joseph and Benjamin were Jacob's favorites. So Jacob planted the seed. Like, actually Laban did that, but Jacob planted the seed of, competition between these boys. How in the world are these boys going to like Joseph? Especially after their mom, they've watched their mother, their whole lives, be treated terribly. And listen to her. I mean, honestly, that's probably part of it. Their mom talked bad about Rachel all the time. So they're not going to like Joseph. There's no way they're going to like him. They might have acted fine, I guess, when they were littler, but they were biased from the beginning because of this whole feud. So the thing that I think we can take away about the character of God here is that he does know how much joy a baby brings to a woman, and how that can fill her life and fill her days and give her something to feel fulfilled, feels like she's making a difference, feels like she is taking care of something vitally important. And if all else is destroyed and nothing else is good, at least she has the child. And Leah, he blessed her with those children so she could be loved and honored. And then he did the same for Rachel. He gave her a son who would then become the second in command of Egypt. She didn't know that, but God knows. God remembers. God establishes. Rachel knows it now. She knows what Joseph turned into. And it was God's way of, I think it was God's way also of honoring Rachel. That he lifted up that son out of, because she suffered a great deal also of not having any children, and watching her sister have all of these kids, and watching her husband go to her sister over and over and then profess that he loved her, but keeps going to the sister. So God cares about women. Like, we found that out a lot. He cares about women in supernatural ways, especially the women who are discarded or sold or forced into situations they don't want to be in. He cares for them. He comes to find them. He gives them what they desire to fulfill a feminine need. He pays attention to that. And to the outsider, it's like, well, this doesn't matter. Like earlier with Rebecca and the twins action, it didn't matter to anybody else whether or not she was uncomfortable or anything like that, but it mattered to God. And so these women and having children and being loved mattered to God. So anytime that you think that nobody cares whether or not you are loved by other people, like, because it is one thing to say, God loves me. Yeah, And everybody kind of knows that. And unfortunately, we kind of take that for granted. But it's like, yeah, God loves me, but he loves everybody. Which doesn't make it less love, but he does care. Like if your mother doesn't love you, if your dad doesn't love you, if your husband doesn't love you, if your siblings don't love you, if your family doesn't, if your friends don't love you, if they mistreat you, he cares about that. It's to him, it's injustice and it is wrong. You should be loved, and you should be loved by other people. If you ask him, he will intervene. If you feel that you are not loved by other people, and especially the people who should love you, if you don't feel loved by them, ask God to do something. Ask God to do something and intervene. I'm not going to tell you what specifically. You know your situation. But ask him to intervene in that situation so that you will know the love that you need to have in your life in order to thrive. Because that's what these prayers mean to me. That's what I see here. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb. And also, when it says God remembered Rachel, it's not like he forgot. It was like, oh yeah, Rachel. The word remembered in there is the same as used with Joseph. It's just he remembered his brothers. He remembered his dreams about. It's not that he. Oh yeah, it was those that had been living in his mind constantly, and now it came to the forefront. It's not like, oh, I forgot. So God had always been thinking about her, and then when she asked the prayer, then it came forward into an action. So he always remembers you. It's a constant. You're never out of God's mind, but you might need to pray to get the situation turned around. He can't intervene in your life unless you invite him to do it. Even in things that you think are too small, he will, and there's nothing too small for him. Everything is the same size for him. It's all important. So I think that's what we can learn from that one. Talk to you later.